Good morning and welcome to the Medicaid Administrative Overview webinar. As we get started, we're going to be going over the basic components of the Medicaid program from the administrative perspective. This is intended to be for those that handle the basic hiring of employees, decision making on who's going to be participating in this program. So we're definitely targeting the administrative audience. As we get going, one of the things I wanted to mention is that this webinar is being recorded so that in the event you would like to watch this webinar over or pass this information along to someone else, it will be posted on our website under our support page, video tutorials for administrators. At the end of the presentation, I'll direct you where you can find that information. All right, so let's get going. One of the things we want to point out is as we go through the presentation, you may find that you have questions about the information. The questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. The entire presentation takes approximately 35 minutes to get through the material. And we have found that although you may have questions initially, that many times we get those questions answered as we move through the presentation. However, if you find that you have questions as we get going, there are a couple of ways to notify me that you have questions. So if you have something burning in your mind and you want to kind of release that and send that over to me, there's a couple of options to do that. When you entered into the webinar, you received what's called a control panel. And there are two ways that you can let me know that you have a question. One of the ways is there is an image of a hand with an arrow pointing up. This is indicating that you'd like to raise your hand to ask a question. The other option is a box under a section called questions where you can enter your question directly into this box and hit send. This will automatically submit the question to me. During the question portion at the end, I will go over or call out anyone that has submitted their questions or has their hand raised. If you raise your hand electronically and decide that you no longer have that question, the image of the hand will turn to an arrow pointing down where you can lower your hand. So feel free to use that if you need to lower your hand or you no longer have that question. All right. So the three major components of the Medicaid to Schools program consist of a cycle, and we made this little cycle so that you could understand that every single component of this program plays a part in how districts receive reimbursement. And through today's presentation, you're going to see how it plays out on a year-long scale, how each one of these components impacts your opportunity for reimbursement. We're going to break down each one of these areas so that as an administrator, you have a general understanding of the reason why we participate and how in fact it does produce reimbursements. So the first major area of the program is called Random Moment Time Study. Random Moment Time Study is a statewide study that is performed in order to find out how often therapists that have been identified at each district as providing what's called a direct medical service, also known as a billable service, participating in this program. They want to find out how often they are actually providing those services. So in a moment, we're going to be breaking down a little bit more how that actually is implemented. But as they are responding to the surveys that they receive, if they get selected, all play a part in the reimbursements that the districts would receive. And we'll break down how that is. But the first major component is making sure anyone at the district that's providing a direct medical service, at least 10% of their time or more, is participating in that study. By participating in that study, it opens up the door to the next component. The next component of the Medicaid to Schools program is what's known as in-term claiming. In-term claiming is the most popular part of the program, at least as far as awareness goes. Basically, this particular area allows districts to receive a level of reimbursement throughout the school year since you do have cash flow that's happening to support these services. So how this area works is basically therapists that are providing these services fill out documentation. Of course, there's a variety of ways in which they may be filling out that documentation. They could be filling out a paper log. They could be utilizing our electronic system, XLogs. Either way, they're filling out documentation. In the event what they're filling out happens to be Medicaid eligible, they then submit that to a billing agent, such as us, MSB. We then take that information and produce an actual claim in the proper format, the proper coding, etc., to the state. The state then reimburses the district for approximately 60% of every dollar we submit that is Medicaid eligible. We're going to go over why it's called interim claiming and how that plays a part in your year and how it plays a part in accessing additional dollars at the end of the year. But that's the second major component of this program. The last and final cycle of the Medicaid to Schools program in a given year is what's called the cost report or cost settlement. Basically, the state recognizes that under the first two channels of reimbursement, districts are not getting every dollar they're entitled to. So the cost report or cost settlement process allows the districts to complete a report on how much it actually cost the district to provide these services to all students. Based on that information, the state can then decide out of that total amount of dollars that is being supported for this program, how much the state still owes your district. So now let's take some time and break down each one of these components. The first thing we want to do is help you better understand what companies, what departments are actually facilitating this program in your state. So starting out, CMS is the federal agency that writes the rules that we work under, and furthermore, audits this information at the state level. So CMS partners with each state. So we're going to give our two main states that we operate in is Texas and Ohio. So the state of Texas and Ohio partner with CMS to work out a program in which they can implement billing under the Medicaid to Schools. In the state, they then partner or create a department by which is responsible for the implementation of the program. In the state of Texas, we have HHSC, Health and Human Services Commission. In Ohio, it's Ohio Department of Medicaid. This was previously ODJFS, Ohio Job and Family Services. Now that each one of these departments has been selected, these departments are ultimately responsible for the implementation of the Medicaid to Schools program and based on the rules that were agreed upon with CMS. Of course, each of these departments may work with other vendors or additional departments to help them facilitate the program. So each state comes up with some additional support systems to help them with the three major components of the program, as previously discussed. So each department takes a particular area of the cycle and implements it. So here's an example. In Texas, Fairbanks is the agency or company that manages random moment time study, cost reporting, whereas TMHP handles the processing of interim claims. In Ohio, the company UMass handles managing random moment time study, while Ohio Department of Education and EDI handle the process of interim claiming and the development of the cost report. So you can see how in each state, they still are responsible for all three areas of the program. They just facilitate it differently and have different departments that help them. School districts participate and work with each one of these agencies. However, many of them partner with companies like us, MSB, to provide that support they need and work directly with these agencies, really being the middleman to ensure that all things are operating as they should to seek these dollars. So let's break down each particular area. Random moment time study is by far one of the most critical components of this program. That's the main reason why in the beginning of the school year, It's the most talked about topic and has the most important deadline right at the beginning of the school year. Here is where we have to decide, out of all the providers or professionals working in the school district who are providing services, that they are selected or provided to the state by the beginning of the school year. For instance, in Texas, we have to submit all of the names that will be providing or participating in this area. We have to submit their names no later than September 13th, at least for this year. For Ohio, we submitted our first quarter August 23rd. So you can see how they want to get the names of the professionals that are providing these services as early as possible in the school year to really kick off the year right. So the whole purpose of this program is to determine how often providers across the state provide direct medical services to students throughout the school day. The first thing that we do is we submit what's called a participant list to the state. So we work with each district to find out any employees or contracted personnel working for students in that district that are providing at least 10% of their time or more doing any direct or billable service. If you don't know all the billable services that are available in your state, we have a resource available on our website. You can go to msbconnect.com under Our Support, and we have a section called Regulations, and you can download a document called the Snapshot for each state. In there, it will list all of the billable services and who can bill for those services. This is a great way to try to start the process of looking at who all can ultimately participate in this program. If they are not participating in random moment time study, then it closes the door on the future channels of reimbursement. So participating in random moment time study is considered the bare minimum in order to open those channels of reimbursement. Then each quarter, the state randomly selects a percentage of the staff that are on the participant list. They select a percentage of them to participate in a particular quarter. Now, the program is run 3 quarters a year because one of the quarters falls in the summer months, so they consider it a freebie. But in those 3 quarters, the state will randomly select a percentage of staff throughout the entire state. So there is a chance some of your staff or none of your staff get selected. However, if they do, they will begin receiving communication from that state's vendor. Keep in mind, in Texas, that would be Fairbanks, and in Ohio, that would be UMass. When they are selected, they receive email communication from these agencies. They are notified of their particular moment, usually at a minimum 2 weeks in advance. And it's simply telling them when their moment occurs or within a certain number of days after their moment occurs, that they log in to the state system and answer 3 questions about what they were doing. Here's the 3 questions that they're asked. Who was with you? What were you doing? And why were you performing the activity? Now, this is very simple and we do maintain its simplicity, but it's really important to begin the process of educating those that do get selected as to, if these questions are so simple, why is it that we are subject to them? And it's really, again, to find out how often they're doing direct medical services. One of the biggest challenges that this particular study can present to providers in a school district is that many times the person filling out these questions perceives that everything that they do is educational. However, there are perceptions that some of the items that they may be doing are considered medical in nature. So creating an awareness of that is super important, and we'll talk about how to do that in a future slide. Lastly, at the end of the year, the state produces a percentage that comes from the total amount of moments responded to by all the providers. So as the providers who are filling out these questions who get selected, they are coded by a person who's reviewing the responses. If in fact the moment that the user responded to is coded as direct medical, this particular percentage will be applied at the end of the year. So what we're going to do in this presentation is play out an entire year and how it all comes together. So we're going to pretend that at the end of a particular year, the random moment time study percentage, the amount of moments that were selected and coded as a direct medical service being provided. In this particular year, we came up with 56%. So we'll watch how that plays out. The next cycle is interim claiming. Again, definitely the most popular recognized area of the program, in that providers fill out documentation, submit it to a billing agent who then produces a claim, and the district receives some level of reimbursement. So in order for districts to seek reimbursement for these costs, you have to understand that the state is assuming that you are incurring cost out of your state and local budgets in order to support this program. So they are looking to make sure that at the end of the year that you did in fact have those costs. So it's very much a trust concept that's going on during the school year, that you are incurring these costs. So the other thing that the state is really looking at is that trust that they are providing to you is also based on, because you are submitting documentation, it's really emphasizing that importance of good documentation. Keep in mind that the Medicaid to Schools program built their whole policy on documentation requirements based on a proven successful method of documentation in the medical field, in that charting progress on your information with that student from previous sessions allows you to, when meeting with the student again, to have enough information to know where to move forward. So because of that, they are willing to give a level of reimbursement for the documentation coming in through the school year. So because the state provides us with some reimbursement through the school year, there are some components that we have to abide by in order to receive these reimbursements. The first thing we have to understand is that providers must fill out clinical notation. Now, they have a couple of options to do this, either using MSB's XLOGS program, which is a web-based program where they can put in their clinical notation, or they can fill out a document on paper. Once they fill out the information, it then is submitted to us for claiming or billing. The next thing is, we, as the billing agent, once we receive this clinical notation, we are then required to apply a rate to the information in order for the state to pay a level of reimbursement. The state provides us with a list of interim or standard rates that we bill any particular therapy based on the provider's credential. So we have a set of rate for every single provider type and every single credential. That way, the state can produce some reimbursement to you based on these rates. So when the information is submitted to the state, they then produce a level of reimbursement, but it's only approximately 60% for every dollar that we submit, due to the feds only pay out their portion. So they do not pay out the state portion. Lastly, the interim payments that you receive throughout the school year, they are going to be deducted at the end of the year from the cost report. So let's continue playing out an example of how this comes together in a full year cycle. So let's pretend at the end of a particular year, we receive approximately $150,000 in interim payments from the school year. The cost report is the last and final piece of this process. So the cost report is a financial report. It's filled out annually with the state, and we submit it to the state for review and analyzing and determining how much the district is actually still eligible for. Without this report, the state will assume that the district did not have any costs associated to providing these direct medical services, and therefore you must have received all the interim payments in error, therefore resulting in 100% recoupment of those funds. So we never want to give the state the impression that we did not incur actual costs. So we want to make sure we're filling out the cost report. So by filling out the cost report, they will review all the costs and then determine how much you are still owed based on the interim rates or the standard rates that your billing agent, such as MSB, billed at. Maybe they were too low. Majority of the times, those rates are lower than your actual payroll costs. So they look at that. And then also they recognize that you only got 60% for every dollar that was submitted. So you weren't able to go after that percentage of funding. So this is really a great opportunity to basically settle up with what you're still owed. Now in Texas, the report is due in April from anything from the previous year. In Texas, the cost report year runs from October 1 through September 30th, and then they give you until April to file the cost report from that year. In Ohio, your report is due in December. Their particular year runs from July 1 through June 30, and then your cost report is due in December. Now let's look at what a cost report really looks like as an example, and how those figures that we've looked at from random moment time study and your interim claimings received throughout a year, how that plays into an end of year settlement. So we're going to give you an example situation. The first thing we fill out is the cost. So they want you to give them all the information related to how much it costs you from payroll and contracted cost. So for this example, we're saying that this particular district incurred about $1 million in payroll and contracted costs for any of those therapists that are providing direct medical services. They then allow you to submit costs that you incurred for supplies and equipment. If you had any supplies or equipment purchases for any of those billable services, you can submit those costs. So for this example, we're saying $20,000. Lastly, as far as costs go, they allow you to submit costs, but only in Texas currently, for costs associated to specialized transportation. And so for this example, we're going to say $50,000. So that brings us to a total of $1,070,000 of all of the cost that we are allowed to submit in our cost report. Then they begin to apply deductions. So the first line item that they deduct from your total is federal funds. If you paid any of your payroll or contracted cost or supplies or equipment, etc., out of other federal funds, then they deduct that off the top, as they've already technically, from a federal perspective, provided funding. So for this example, we're saying approximately $25,000 was paid out of other federally funded sources, so they're going to deduct that. Then they deduct how much money they've already given you through the interim claiming process. So as we looked in some previous slides, we gave the example that at the end of a year, they had interim payments received of $150,000, so that gets deducted. So now we're looking at the total of $1,070,000 minus these deductions as $895,000. Well, it's not fair that the Medicaid program just cut you a check for $895,000, given that the Medicaid to Schools program is target customer is those eligible for Medicaid. So here's how they find out of that $895,000, how much you're actually eligible for based on a Medicaid population. So that's where the ratios come in. So the first ratio that gets applied is what's called the IEP ratio, or in the state of Ohio, it's called the MER. This is where they start applying district-specific information. Basically, we've determined this ratio is based on the number of students with IEPs, but out of those students, how many are actually Medicaid eligible? So in this ratio, for example, we're saying 62% of our population of students on IEPs are actually Medicaid eligible. So the first thing they would do is say, out of that $895,000, only 62% were actually those costs being used towards Medicaid eligible students. Then the next thing they look at, well, is yes, 895,000, 62% of that was available for Medicaid eligible students, but how much of that was actually used for direct medical services? And that's where your random moment time study percentage comes in. This is a statewide percentage, which means everyone in the state is subject to that percentage. So however many moments were coded in a given year as doing a direct medical service, that's the percentage that every district is applied. So the example we were giving earlier was 56%. So now it's saying out of the $895,000, 62% was eligible for Medicaid students, but of that, 56% of that was used for direct medical services. The last ratio that's applied, but only in Texas, is how many students that are provided specialized transportation, how many of those students were Medicaid eligible. In this example, we're using 40%. Once these ratios are applied to that $895,000, you then are left with your total with ratios applied of $290,744. Now going back to the very beginning, in that the feds only pay out their portion. The example that we give is 60%. Now it varies each year, but it does range between 60 up to 64%. But for this example, we're saying that we submit to Medicaid that we are owed $290,744, but the feds only pay out their portion of 60%, leaving us with a settlement amount of $174,446.40. So that in a nutshell is how the cost report works and how the previous cycles of the program impact your settlement amount. So now a lot of questions start getting raised as to what can you do to help get every dollar that you're entitled to. The number one thing that you can do is support your MSB program specialist. Your program specialist is taking care of everything that you need to be successful with accessing these dollars. The most important and awareness thing that we were trying to accomplish with this webinar was making you more aware as to why they're asking these questions that they've been asking you and why they've been asking you to update certain documents that we provide to you. This hopefully will provide that enough information to you to help you understand why your program specialist has been asking for this type of information. So let's break down some of the things that your program specialist has been asking for and why it's so important. Number one, the number one thing your program specialist has really been working on over the past month is your staff roster. We need to make sure that everyone that is providing at least 10% of their time or more performing any direct or billable service, that they are on your roster. If you want to review your roster, you can go to msbconnect.com under our support and go to our client portal, or you can type in this URL directly. Now, for Ohio, your staff roster was completed on August 23rd. However, the staff rosters are still there in order to continue to maintain them for the next quarter that becomes available where we can provide more information or more staff. For Texas, we've been working really hard to meet that upcoming deadline of September 13th, which is coming up very soon. So be on the lookout for communication with your program specialist to make sure your roster is fully up to date. The second thing is federal funds. As you saw from the cost report example, we need to try as much as possible to protect the dollars in regards to payroll, contracted costs, supplies, equipment, as many of those costs that can be applied to the cost report that you can protect by not paying them out of other federally funded sources, you'll have eligible for reimbursement. So try to reduce your deductions as much as possible. Now, this may not always be a scenario, especially in a year one implementation of this program, maybe not even a year two, but definitely start strategizing how you can get there. If you have more specific questions about that, our team, our executive team, goes out on the field twice a year, meeting with all administrators about this program and where you're currently at in accessing these dollars. And those are great times to get some consultation on how to reallocate. You can always, of course, contact your program specialist to get a one-on-one session as well. The third thing is random moment time study awareness. As we described in the previous slides about random moment time study, and the fact that in our example, 56% of the moments were coded as providing direct medical services, the best thing that we can do is make sure that those that are participating in the random moment time study program is that they're aware of what the program is and who is facilitating the program. More importantly, understanding that the people that are reviewing the moments that are responded to do perceive that a lot of activities that are going on under direct medical services are medical in nature versus educational. So what we are doing, MSB, is if any provider is selected for a moment, we are sending them in communication. In this communication, we are providing a video tutorial that we would encourage that the participants watch at least once a year. This particular video goes over all of the questions that they are subject to and basically how to be more aware when what they were doing at their moment may be perceived as direct medical, and how to adjust their response accordingly. So one thing we are asking for you to really do is help us ensure that those providers are watching that video. And the last thing is documentation. The number one way to get claiming, to get reimbursement, is to make sure that your providers are documenting. And we would say documenting for all kiddos. Regardless of the Medicaid documentation, it is critical for the success of any program that documentation is going on. Specifically under this program, it will return the district the most reimbursement. It'll also limit your audit exposure and liability while reducing your chances of missing out on reimbursement due to the variables surrounding how students become eligible or maintain eligibility. So in order for you to feel like you can encourage providers to participate, I would definitely encourage you to go to our website, our video tutorial page, and watch a couple of videos that go through how to add sessions to XLogs or use certain functionalities to expedite their documentation. Because the more aware you are of the XLogs program and its simplicity, the more encouragement you can provide when someone needs to be redirected or a provider needs to be redirected. So I really encourage you to watch a couple of those videos on our video tutorial page. Again, you can go to msbconnect.com and go under video tutorials or our support video tutorials and watch some of those to build your confidence in being able to encourage that participation. All right, so that concludes this webinar as far as the information we wanted to provide to you. And we're going to move into the questions portion of this presentation. So I want to remind you where you can find your tools to submit your questions. You can either locate the hand image with an arrow facing up to raise your hand. Again, if you raised your hand and need to lower it, you can simply click on it. The arrow will be facing down to lower your hand. The other option is you can submit your questions electronically by locating the questions box, enter your question, and then send it so we can go through those questions. So I'll now move into the questions portion looking for anyone that has questions. I went ahead and put this slide up for any of you that do not have questions. Feel free to exit the presentation as we have concluded the presentation. But here are some things to kind of be on the lookout for on our website. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about your experience today, we do have an event survey on our website. Also some additional resources that are available. We know a lot of your staff are getting up and running for the school year, so I want to point out that video tutorials are awesome for refreshers for those that are kind of kicking off the school year, starting their documentation. And I also really want to point out that we are providing complimentary webinars for all users on our website. So really encourage your staff to go to our Connect page and go under our support and register for all the different types of webinars. We're running them several times a week and different topics so that they can get that information that they need. So definitely really encourage giving them some information to kind of kick off the school year. So now I will head over to anyone that has some questions. Again, if you have no questions, thanks for joining us. And if you do, please stay on the line to answer your questions.